The receipt fell from Dean's coat pocket, fluttering to the floor as I emptied his pockets before doing the laundry. I froze, my heart pounding as I read the embossed logo, the Ritz Carlton, downtown Chicago. A one-night stay for two, charges totaling $647. Dean and I hadn't taken a trip to Chicago in over a year. Not since Tessa's dance recital forced us to cancel our anniversary weekend plans. My hands trembled as I examined the receipt more closely. The date scrawled at the top was just 2 weeks ago. Dean had been in Indianapolis that weekend for a real estate conference, or so he claimed. I searched his coat for more clues, my vision blurring as tears welled up. Tucked in the inner pocket was a crumpled valet ticket from the hotel's parking garage. So he had taken his car there too, removing any doubt about what kind of conference he attended. The click of the front door startled me. I shoved the evidence back into his coat, just as Tessa bounded into the laundry room. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" She glanced at me with those discerning hazel eyes, instantly sensing something was off. Forcing a smile, I pulled her into a hug. "Nothing, honey, just doing some laundry." Tessa hugged me back tightly. My smart, sweet girl, how could I protect her from the truth about her father? "Is Dad's stuff in here?" She bent down to grab his dress shirt from the basket. "I'll take it up to him." "No," I said too forcefully. Tessa's eyes widened in surprise. I mean, I've got it covered. Why don't you start on your homework?" She squinted at me suspiciously, but seemed to decide against pressing further. "Okay, if you're sure." After Tessa left, I collapsed onto the cold tiled floor. Dean's coat clutched against my chest as sobs racked my body. For so long, I had brushed off his late nights at work, his excuses about business trips and client meetings, but this blatant evidence of his betrayal was too much to ignore. How could the man I loved, the father of my child, be so deceitful? We had been together since college, high school sweethearts who emerged from humble beginnings to build what I thought was a wonderful life, 2 thriving careers, a beautiful home in the suburbs, a daughter we adored. Yet for who knew how long, Dean had been lying to us, lying to me. I'm not naive. I knew the strain of raising a family while balancing 2 demanding jobs had created distance between us lately. The spontaneous romance, the date nights, the getaways, those had fallen by the wayside as responsibilities mounted. But I never imagined Dean would give in to temptation and shatter the vows we had made before God. My cheeks burned with humiliation over how blind I had been. The signs were all there if I had just opened my eyes, his evasive demeanor, the nights he claimed to be working late, but I could never reach him on his cell, his sudden interest in dressing sharper and staying more fit. I should have listened to the nagging voice in my gut telling me something was wrong with my life, with my marriage. But it was easier to bury my suspicions, to settle for the thin excuses he offered. Marlene Hart, successful career woman on the surface, but a foolish, ostrich-like failure as a wife. No more, I decided, anger replacing the hurt. I would get to the truth, and if Dean had betrayed our sacred vows, there would be consequences, for him and for the woman he had been unfaithful with. I was done being the last to know about my own life. This unraveling was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I focused on maintaining an air of normalcy around Dean and Tessa, all while covertly gathering more evidence of his infidelity. I logged into the email account linked to his frequent flyer number and discovered bookings for stays in Chicago, Kansas City, and San Francisco during supposed work trips. My manager, Brandon, must have noticed my distracted demeanor at the office. "Everything okay, Marlene? You've seemed a little off lately." I plastered on a polite smile. "Just some family stuff to deal with, but I'm managing." Brandon patted my shoulder consolingly. "Well, let me know if you need any personal days or anything. Family has to come first." If only he knew the truth about my picture-perfect family's sordid situation. I doubted any of my colleagues would be shocked to learn prim proper Marlene Hart was being cheated on by her husband. That night, I decided to finally clear the air with Tessa. If Dean's tangled web continued to unravel, she deserved to know why. I tapped on her bedroom door before entering. "Hey, sweetie, can we chat for a minute?" Tessa looked up from her homework, chewing on the end of her pen. "Sure, what's up?" I settled on the edge of her bed, feeling a pang at how grown-up my little girl had become. At 16, she was nearly a woman herself. "I've been dealing with some issues regarding your father lately, and I think it's time I filled you in." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't seem entirely surprised. "Okay. The other day I found evidence that seems to suggest he may have been unfaithful to me, to us." Tessa was quiet for a long moment, before finally speaking. "You know, I overheard something at Dad's office a couple weeks ago. Maybe it's related?" My heart skipped a beat. "What did you hear?" "I was waiting for Dad to finish up a meeting so we could go to dinner. His colleague Ronnie came into his office and started laughing about how Dad had a sweet exotic thing on the side. Then he said they were going to hit the Ritz this weekend for some special treatment with a couple of girls." White-hot rage surged through me at Ronnie's vulgar words, at the thought of Dean with some sleazy prostitute at that hotel. But I maintained an even tone. For Tessa's sake. "I see. Well, that certainly aligns with what I discovered." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "So it's true? Dad's been cheating?" I pulled my daughter into a fierce hug, determined to stay strong for her, even as my own heart broke into pieces. "Unfortunately, all evidence suggests that's the case. I am so sorry, sweetheart. You didn't deserve to have this happen to our family." Tessa sniffed against my shoulder. "But why, Mom? Why would he do this to us after everything you've sacrificed for him and his career?" That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? Why do men who seem to have it all still throw away their family's love and trust for cheap thrills? I stroked Tessa's hair soothingly. "I don't have an answer, baby girl. But what I do know is that we can get through this together. We're going to be just fine." I meant the words as a reassuring promise. At the same time, they came out sounding like a vow to uncover every sordid detail of Dean's betrayal. And to make him pay dearly for the anguish he had inflicted on the two people who loved him most. After confiding in Tessa about Dean's betrayal, I felt a renewed sense of determination. My daughter and I were now a united front. We would weather this storm together and make sure her father faced the consequences he deserved. The next morning, I feigned a stomach bug and called into work, using the free time to take my investigation into high gear. While Tessa was at school, I dug through Dean's home office, my fury mounting with each new discovery. Credit card statements detailed thousands of dollars in unexplained expenditures, lavish meals, pricey hotel suites, even some unseemly charges from online flower delivery services. So he had been wining and dining his mistress in addition to bedding her. How cliché. I found an electronic treasure trove when I accessed Dean's laptop and recovered deleted emails and documents. There were incriminating messages back and forth with his coworker and supposed wingman Ronnie, crowing about their extramarital dalliances. But even more disturbing were the files that appeared to outline an elaborate real estate Ponzi scheme Dean was involved with. They detailed how he and a network of shady developers and bankers had been systemically overinflating the value of commercial properties through falsified appraisals and sales records. It was fraud on a massive scale, netting the conspirators millions in ill-gotten profits. This went so far beyond mere infidelity. My husband, the man I had supported wholeheartedly in building his career, was quite literally a criminal. I felt sickened by his deception and greed. He had risked destroying our family over his insatiable lust for money and sexual gratification. As if his moral failings weren't enough, Dean's reckless behavior had now put our financial security at risk. He was going to pay, in more ways than one. When Tessa got home from school, we strategized about our next steps. To her credit, she stayed admirably focused and determined, clearly inheriting my pragmatic nature rather than getting bogged down by melodrama. "Well, we can't let Dad know we're onto him yet," she said matter-of-factly. "Not until we have an airtight case built against him." I nodded in agreement. "Precisely. I want to gather enough evidence that he can't obfuscate or slither his way out of taking responsibility." Tessa tapped away at her laptop keyboard. "I was thinking I could try hacking into Dad's email and messaging apps. See if I can recover more of his communications." "You know how to do that?" I couldn't help but raise an impressed eyebrow. She shrugged modestly. "I may or may not have gotten pretty savvy at cracking codes and bypassing firewalls. My teenage daughter, the secret hacker vigilante. I really shouldn't have been that surprised, given her incredible intellect and preternatural maturity." "Okay, you work on that," I said. "Meanwhile, I'm going to consult with a lawyer about protecting our assets and rights as this gets uglier. Tessa nodded grimly. We both knew there was no going back now. Dean's actions had shattered the family he professed to cherish so much. Now we were in scorched earth mode, poised to bring him down in appropriately epic fashion. I thought back to the day Dean and I had met at that frat party in college. The cheesy pickup line he had used, his warm smile, the certainty I had felt even then that he was the one. Our relationship had seemed blessed from the start, like we were destined to build a perfect life and future together. In that moment, I realized the man I thought I knew so well was a mythological creature, a mirage that had obscured the true Dean, a selfish, deceitful husband and criminal who was about to learn the harsh price of betraying his family. The next morning, I put on my most confident suit and headed downtown to meet with Ella James, one of the top family law attorneys in Chicago. As I waited in her pristine office adorned with accolades and Ivy League diplomas, I tried to shake the nagging feeling of dread over what I was about to set in motion. Ella swept in, all poise and polish, offering a warm smile. Marlene, thanks for coming in. I must say, your situation is quite complicated. I nodded soberly. You could say that, but I need to protect myself and my daughter, no matter how messy things get. Laying out the sordid facts about Dean's affairs and criminal activities, I watched as Ella's expression morphed from empathetic to disturbed. I'm so sorry you've had to endure this nightmare, Marlene, but you did the right thing by gathering evidence. She shook her head. Both the infidelity and this real estate scheme, either one would be grounds for divorce and potentially criminal charges. My stomach twisted at those words, despite knowing this was inevitable. No matter how much Dean had betrayed me, I still remembered our happier times together. Still loved the man he used to be, at least. So what are my options? I asked hoarsely. Ella laid out a series of legal strategies, protecting my assets, securing full custody of Tessa, and pursuing criminal charges against Dean and his co-conspirators. By the time I left her office, I had a clear roadmap, even if the path ahead looked daunting. When I arrived home, Tessa was waiting anxiously. One look at my face, and she knew the situation was as dire as we feared. I take it the lawyer laid it all out? She asked quietly. I simply nodded, surprising myself by managing to stay composed. We're going to hit Dean with everything we've got. Divorce, seizing his assets, maybe even criminal charges, depending on how deep this fraud goes. Tessa's eyes widened slightly, but she seemed resolute rather than scared. Well, I did what I could to help build the case. She turned her laptop to show me a series of recovered emails and text messages between Dean and Ronnie, each one more damning than the last. There were explicit details about their trysts with various mistresses and escorts. But even more concerning were their boasts about tricking banks and regulators, laundering money through shell companies, and scamming property owners out of millions in illegally inflated sale prices. I also found some cryptic audio recordings that sound like blackmail discussions, Tessa added grimly. This goes far beyond what we even knew. I shook my head in numb disbelief, having to remind myself that this wasn't tawdry cable movie plot. It was the harsh reality of how my life had unraveled, of the truth about the man I had built a family and future with. Dean has some serious skeletons in his closet, I murmured, and we're going to unleash every last one of them. A few days later, Dean headed out of town again on another alleged work trip. As soon as he was gone, I changed all the locks and passcodes, boxing up what few possessions of his remained untainted by his misdeeds. It was a definitive, if small, first step towards reclaiming my home and life. When he inevitably returned to hostile territory, Dean would learn just how steep a price he was going to pay. There would be no more looking the other way, no more benefit of the doubt. He had gambled everything by indulging his greed and lust. Now it was time to double down and take him for everything he was worth. Dean swaggered through the front door a week later, rolling his suitcase behind him with his usual breezy demeanor, but his expression quickly shifted to one of confusion when he noticed the changes. Marlene, why does the security code not work, and where is all my stuff? I entered from the kitchen, Tessa at my side, arms folded across our chests in a united front. Dean's eyes widened as he took in our grim demeanors. What's going on here? He asked warily. Rather than answering, I pulled out a thick manila envelope and tossed it on the foyer table in front of him. "Open it," I said flatly. He shot me a questioning look, but seemed to sense this wasn't a situation to argue. Sliding the envelope's contents out, his face drained of color as he thumbed through the stack of documents. Copies of all the credit card statements, emails, recordings, and financial records exposing his tangled web of affairs and fraud. "How? Where did you get all this?" he sputtered, looking between Tessa and I desperately. Tessa stepped forward, surprising me with the steel in her tone. "Does it really matter, Dad? We know everything about your mistresses, your illegal deals, all the money you stole through those real estate scams. It's all right here in black and white." Dean seemed to deflate, dropping the document pile as if it had burned him. He opened his mouth, presumably to offer one of his familiar lies and justifications, but I cut him off sharply. "Don't even try denying it, Dean. We have proof of all your sordid activities, the affairs, the Ponzi scheming, the bank fraud, and money laundering. It's the full truth without any more excuses to hide behind." He worked his jaw, seemingly at a loss before his features contorted into an ugly sneer. "Oh, like you're so innocent in all this, Marlene? Always burying yourself in work, never making time for me anymore." I couldn't believe the audacity of him trying to blame Schiff to me. That's no excuse for screwing around with other women and breaking my trust, not to mention potentially ruining us financially with your greed. I shook my head in disgust. Anything to save face and avoid taking responsibility, right, Dean? You smug, self-righteous... Don't talk to my mom like that. Tessa's voice rang out, startling us both. Hot tears streamed down her cheeks, but her body was taut with fury. "After everything she sacrificed for this family while you threw it all away?" Dean opened his mouth again, but seemed to think better of it. The damning evidence must have finally silenced his delusional bravado. He simply stood there, jaw clenched, unable to meet our furious gazes. "Get out," I said, surprising myself with how cold and hard my voice sounded. "Take your shot and get out. This marriage is over." When he didn't immediately move, Tessa stepped forward and grabbed the box containing his belongings, shoving it against his chest roughly. "You heard her. Get the fuck out of our house before I call the cops and tell them everything." That seemed to snap Dean out of his stupor. He grabbed the box and his suitcase, shoulders slumped in what I could only assume was a mixture of shame and anger. As he trudged out the door, he paused, turning back with an unreadable expression. "You'll regret this," he muttered darkly. "We had it all, and you threw it away over some..." "Some what?" I cut him off, quirking an eyebrow imperiously. "Some audacious lies and criminal behavior that you thought I'd just accept? Good fucking luck with that." I slammed the door in his face, a cavalcade of emotions crashing over me, rage, sorrow, but most of all, a sense of release. The shackles of Dean's treachery had been unlocked, the first weight lifted from my shoulders. When I turned back to Tessa, she was smiling through her tears. "We really showed that douchebag, huh?" Despite everything, I laughed and pulled her into a tight hug. "That we did, kiddo. That was just the first salvo." We had laid the first bricks on the path to making Dean pay for his unforgivable sins, and there was no turning back now. In the aftermath of kicking Dean out, I naively thought the hardest part was behind us. How wrong I was. Over the next few weeks, the full weight of his betrayal and our paths to revenge came crashing down. First, there were the vicious legal battles as Dean fought me tooth and nail over custody of Tessa and our assets. Ella was a lioness, ruthlessly burying him under the mountain of evidence we had amassed. Still, the prospect of airing our family's ugly laundry in court made my skin crawl. Then Dean's Ponzi scheme unraveled spectacularly, drawing in law enforcement. One morning, there was a firm rap on the door. Federal agents with a warrant to search our home as part of their fraud investigation into Dean and his cohorts. Seeing my life picked apart before their unfeeling eyes will be seared into my memory forever. As if that indignity wasn't enough, reporters soon descended en masse. Lurid stories detailing Dean's affairs and crooked business dealings splashed across the front pages and gossip websites. For Tessa's sake, I tried keeping her sheltered from the worst of it, but she was far too perceptive to be fully shielded. One night I arrived home from a grueling day at the office to find her on the living room couch, laptop open and earbuds in. She jumped guiltily when I entered. "Hey, Mom, I was just, I raised my eyebrows. "Let me guess. Reading more of those articles again?" She bit her lip, eyes down. Her face said it all. "I can't help it," she muttered miserably. "All the stuff they're writing about Dad, about you." She trailed off, shaking her head in disbelief. My stomach twisted. I knew exactly which articles she meant. The ones salaciously detailing Dean's trysts with various mistresses and call girls. The ones scrutinizing my neglect of my wifely duties as a high-powered career woman. The ones questioning whether I had turned a blind eye to obvious signs of trouble in our marriage. I settled onto the couch beside Tessa, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I know it's brutal, sweetheart. Believe me, what those vultures write doesn't capture even a fraction of how blindsided and betrayed I felt by your father's actions." She looked up at me with those big, soulful eyes that had inherited both Dean and I's colors. "But why, Mom? Why did he throw it all away like this? I keep reading those articles, trying to find some shred of an explanation, but it just gets more and more confusing and messed up." I chewed my lip, trying to find words to sum up the kaleidoscopic mess of emotions I still grappled with over Dean's implosion. The truth is, I'm not sure we'll ever understand his motives fully. Whether it was boredom, entitlement, or simple moral depravity, he made the choice to discard the family he claimed to cherish above all else. Saying it aloud reopened those wounds of rejection and humiliation from his affairs. But I pushed through, needing Tessa to understand the cold, hard truths about her father. What I do know is this: his actions were utterly selfish and unforgivable. Any attempts at justification are just sad excuses to avoid accountability. I cupped her cheek tenderly, feeling my heart splinter further at her wounded expression. "What your dad did was on him, baby girl, not us. We did nothing to invite this pain and public mockery into our lives beyond loving him unconditionally." Tessa nodded, wiping away the tears that had escaped down her cheeks. "I know, and to be honest, as much as it sucks to read all that horrible stuff, it just makes me angrier at him, for hurting you and tainting what our family was." Her jaw set in a determined line that reminded me so much of myself. "He's going to pay for that, Mom. We're going to make sure of it." I matched her fiery gaze and felt that all-too-familiar burning for vengeance reignite in the pit of my stomach. Damn straight we are. Dean Hart could temporarily avoid consequences by hiding behind his hotshot lawyers and privilege. But we would make sure that sheltered deniability was only temporary. The fallout was just beginning, for him and everyone unlucky enough to be caught in the blast radius of his selfish rampage. I was done being the victim. It was time to become the avenger. With Ella's tenacious representation, my mounting legal proceedings against Dean proceeded full steam ahead despite his attempts at stalling and obfuscating. Each court victory, no matter how small, filled me with a sense of resolute satisfaction. First, the judge awarded me full custody of Tessa, citing the mountain of evidence detailing Dean's moral failings as a father. He tried playing up his usual charming bravado on the stand, but the damning communication records and money trails couldn't be disputed. When the order was read, I had to keep myself from smirking at the flicker of desperation on Dean's face. He had severely underestimated just how far I was willing to go once his web of lies and betrayal became known. Next came the assets and property division, another lopsided outcome in my favor. Between the legal bills for his fraud case and the court judgments freezing his assets, Dean found his high-flying lifestyle as a commercial real estate broker ground to a humiliating halt. "Go ahead and appeal, you arrogant prick," Ella said with a vindicated grin after another hearing. "More delays just mean more legal fees bleeding you dry." Throughout it all, Tessa was my unwavering rock, even when I felt petty doubts creeping in over the scorched earth path we had set ourselves on. Seeing my brave girl grappling with the collateral damage of having her family blown apart was a constant punch to the gut. "It'll all be worth it when he gets what he deserves, Mom," she assured me one night over dinner, squeezing my hand tightly. "We can't let his disgusting lies and crimes just be forgiven." I marveled at her wisdom and perspective, far beyond her 16 years. She had seen firsthand the devastation caused by turning a blind eye to Dean's misdeeds. Tessa knew the only path forward was the painful but necessary one of holding him accountable. And make no mistake, he was being held accountable like never before. The legal assault I had unleashed on Dean spread like a virus, infecting every aspect of his once thriving existence. Just a few months after I had kicked him out, his luxury home was foreclosed and auctioned off. His prized Mercedes and country club memberships were seized and liquidated to pay the sprawling legal fees and court judgments against him. Before long, he was squatting in some seedy motel, adrift without his family's love and the material trappings he had so valued. We relished every salacious news report detailing his downward spiral, from the dismissal of his bogus lawsuits trying to claw back assets to the stripping of his real estate broker's license. Having spent so many years blinded by his lies, there was a grim satisfaction in watching Dean's shiny facade get stripped away piece by piece until the ugly truth was all that remained. The coup de grace was when the Department of Justice finally handed down indictments against him and his band of co-conspirator brokers, bankers, and property developers. Over 24 charges: wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and more. Potential penalties ranging into the millions of dollars in fines and decades of prison time if convicted. "About damn time," Tessa said through gritted teeth when we received the news, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the arms of her chair. I simply nodded, unable to speak around the tight lump of emotions clogging my throat. There was undoubtedly a twisted sense of victory in seeing Dean's unscrupulous business dealings and moral depravity laid bare for all to see. But there were no cheers or celebrations, just a hollow relief at reaching this point. Because no amount of ruined reputations or draconian sentences could undo the permanent damage wrought by my husband's lies and betrayal. The innocence of the Hart family I had believed in for so long was gone forever, a distant memory eroded by harsh realities. We had risen from the ashes of Dean's selfishness, emboldened in a way that only true trauma could forge. But that tenacious resolve came with the heavy burden of accepting how ugly and unfair life could truly be. As the storm clouds of his legal jeopardy closed in, I couldn't help but feel pangs of the love I had once nurtured for the flawed man at the center of this destruction. Not the criminal he had become, but the imperfect person I had trusted, the father of my child, the dreamer who had once aspired to so much more than greed and lust. But those frail embers of affection and nostalgia were stamped out by the gale winds of his ultimate betrayal. Dean Hart had gambled away his family's devotion in pursuit of insatiable vices, and now he would be forced to pay that shattering debt in full, no matter how spiritually it bankrupted him. The day of Dean's sentencing hearing was crisp and quiet, the kind of early fall morning that would have once inspired our family to take a drive and admire the changing leaves. But those idyllic memories now felt like entries from someone else's life. Tessa and I arrived at the courthouse hand in hand, our mutual solidarity fortifying us for this final chapter in our quest to hold Dean accountable. A gaggle of reporters shoved microphones and cameras in our faces as we entered, hungry for any reaction shots or quotable sound bites. But we pushed through in stony silence, Ella's capable assistant clearing our path. Inside the hushed courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy, part solemn ceremony, part circus sideshow for the rubberneckers baying for blood. I scanned the crowd for Dean, but he was already seated at the defense table, shoulders slumped in wrinkled shirt sleeves as he conferred with his lawyers. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of something akin to pity as I studied him. The dark circles under his eyes, the thinness of his cheeks, the unkempt hair. This man was a mere shadow of the confident, affluent husband I had once loved and admired. The consequences I had vowed to make him face had undoubtedly extracted their punishing toll. But that wisp of empathy was quickly extinguished as images of his misdeeds flashed in my mind. The lies, the affairs, the intricate fraud schemes that had infected every aspect of our lives. Dean's selfish choices had lit the fuse on this explosion, not me. I was simply the shrapnel-scarred survivor demanding justice be served, no matter how charred the process left us all. The hearing itself was a mercifully stayed, by-the-numbers affair of legal choreography. Dean entered his plea, a procedural recitation of charges was read aloud, victim impact statements were offered. When it was my turn on the stand, I kept my words clipped and concise as instructed by Ella, letting the incontrovertible evidence speak for itself. Dean Hart's actions shattered the sacred vows and trust that held our family together. While he indulged in ego, affairs, and criminal greed, he robbed our daughter and myself of our sense of security and identity as a loving household. I paused, keeping my voice controlled despite the grief that still lingered in that admission. His punishment must be severe, precisely because of who he betrayed, the two people in this world who deserved his full loyalty and devotion above all else. Tessa's hand found mine and squeezed tightly in a quiet gesture of gratitude and support. The judge, a wizened woman insulated by decades on the bench, sat inscrutably as she took in the weighty accounts. In the end, she wasted no words in rendering her decision, methodically walking through the litany of convictions. Fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, criminal conspiracy, an avalanche of fines, penalties, and prison sentences that would bury Dean in a tomb of concrete and steel for the better part of the next 2 decades. Rather than reacting with exultant cheers, the courtroom seemed to exhale a collective sigh of muted finality at the ruling. It was the proper outcome after all, an unshakable precedent upheld and poison expelled from the community to restore order. Still, as the bailiffs led Dean away in handcuffs, he managed to twist around, zeroing in on Tessa and I with eyes brimming with bitter venom. "I hope your revenge leaves you both stronger than this betrayal left me," he spat out, voice dripping with resentment and barely suppressed rage. His desperate attempt at regaining some sense of moral high ground was so ludicrously pathetic, I felt a distant pity welling up again. Because unlike Dean, Tessa and I would not be reduced to a broken, hollow shell of our former selves. We were battered, yes, but not destroyed by the sprawling wreckage trailing his passing like a toxic spill. As he disappeared through the courtroom door, I rose and slowly made my way over to Tessa, wrapping her in a tight embrace. With the proceedings concluded and judgment rendered, our family's quest for catharsis from Dean's transgressions was now complete. No more courtrooms or lawyer meetings or depositions scrutinizing every sordid detail of where things went so irrevocably wrong. We had risen from the ashes of Dean's betrayal, now free to begin shaping our own path forward, unburdened by his lies and untethered to the poisoned roots of our past. "It's over," Tessa murmured softly as we stood there holding each other amidst the dispersing crowd. "We survived." I pressed my lips against the top of her head, relishing her strength and the promise of a future she could author without the stain of her father's legacy. "That we did, baby. It's just you and me now, but we're going to be just fine. Because no matter how deep the scars, a love that withstands such cataclysmic levels of betrayal becomes forged into something wholly tempered and unbreakable."